The Georgia sun poured down like retribution as he was shoved face first onto the asphalt with his hands behind his back, just flashing lights, yelling commands, and the lack of any prior notice or explanation. You fit the description. Raymond Ellis was a distinguished adveran and constitutional law student, and none of it at that time was important. One officer held up a plastic evidence bag like a trophy, and that was what mattered. Inside a tiny white powder packet was discovered beneath his seat. The only thing Raymond could say was in a calm but forceful voice, "That wasn't present. Previously, I was in the store when you searched this car. However, body cam the search was not captured on camera. It began too late." By sunset, local news stations were conveniently his name, his face, the headline swirling, "Veteran caught with narcotics," shown on all of Claiborne County's screens. His honorable discharge was not mentioned. No reference to his public work earned him a scholarship to law school. Just another black man who is booked, handcuffed, and fingerprints that resemble statistics. However, they were unaware of one aspect of Raymond Ellis. Not only was he a citizen, but he had also researched the system's shortcomings. He had received federal employees in risk reduction. He was familiar with the nuances of federal supervision regulations, and above all, he was aware how to properly, legally, and discreetly document everything. Although the cops believed they had closed a door, they had really opened one. A veteran with nothing in his arms was behind that door, but the law and the truth. Additionally, at the pivotal moment in this story, the same officers will be placed under a body cam if they smiled at one, since what began as an erroneous arrest is about to reveal a pattern of racial discrimination and start a full-scale civil rights probe. Evidence manipulation and misuse of authority. This is not a tale of retaliation. It's a tally about responsibility, and he doesn't want your pity, Raymond. He wants the system to respond for what it did on camera and on court record. Thus, pay attentive attention. Due to the fact that the same Manthe are going to learn something that they were not taught at the academy, which they attempted to conceal under false accusations. What's actually what justice looks like when it comes from the man they attempted to silence. Raymond Ellis made a move prior to being arrested, like a certified ghost through Claiborne. It's not a ghost you forget, but one you never reidentification before it's too late. He wasn't ostentatious. Didn't say much. Drove a dependable four-door sedan with weeks without a car wash. He leased a small flat on the outskirts of town, filled with legal pads scrolled with case law, battle manuals, and law books references. He coached teenagers in self-defense while working part-time at a nearby community center, providing guidance to young veterans who struggled to adapt to civilian life. However, underneath it all, he was always subsving. He understood systems. Not because he was paranoid, he would lived in one for years. He was getting ready to take on another now. Raymond has been a tactical intelligence officer in Iraq for 2 tours. His employment wasn't to shoot guns. It was to identify trends, neutralize dangers, and foresee poor choices before they occurred. It had not been easy for him to return to the United States. In silence, he had witnessed decent men turn shadows within themselves. However, he didn't want to be merely another name in a file that was forgotten. Consequently, when the GI bill gave him the opportunity, he seized it. 36, at the top of his class in law school, centered on civil liberties. Ironically, criminal procedure and constitutional rights. However, once a badge stated differently, none of that mattered in Claiborne, Georgia. On the surface, the weeks before his arrest were routine, but in retrospect, they had warning signs. A traffic stop that took longer than necessary. Every time he parked close to the institution, a patrol car slowed down. Library, he was asked, "You military? You don't look like you're from around here?" By a convenience shop employee. Of minute friction that Raymond-like people experience in their bones long before it is apparent what took place. It was not an impromptu day. The event was staged. Raymond had made his way to the Circle 12 petrol station to catch up with a longtime buddy who was visiting the area. A veteran who needed assistance reviving a dead battery. It was a half-full lot. There were already 2 police cars parked close to the side. Windows are shattered and lights are off. Raymond observed it, mentally filed it, and did not recoil. He hadn't done anything improper. He entered and purchased 2 bottles of water. Above the door, security cameras were blinking red. He went outside with the receipt in hand, and that's when Thea's shift took place. One of the cops came up slowly, like a person approaching a car. They had previously determined it was suspicious. The policeman said, "Mind if we have a word?" His hand is already at rest close to his belt. Raymond did not object. He was more aware. Rather than arguing outside, the second cop went around to the side of the passenger. "We received a report regarding a suspicious automobile. It fits the description of yours. What is described?" They didn't state, however. They had him standing outside in a matter of minutes while one of them opened his back door and feigned to secure it. The car. Although Raymond was familiar with the procedure, something seemed strange, too practiced, too diddy. Then the so-called evidence, the discovery came. There was a tiny plastic bag hidden beneath the floor mat at the back. White powder. The officer displayed it as though he had discovered gold. Raymond's breathing remained steady. He did not shake his hands, he just gazed. "That wasn't in my car." The officers looked at one another, though only after a lie has been practiced. "Does that make sense?" They immediately took him into custody. At the station, without hesitation, I booked him and printed the charges. Possession of a restricted substance with the intention of distributing it. In a community like Claiborne, a single phrase can be fatal, especially when combined with a mugshot and a fugazi presumptions. Raymond's face was on every local news website within an hour. The article made no reference to his military service, neglected to add that he was just 1 semester away from earning his law school degree. It didn't must. The story was set in stone already. Drugs, a black man, arrest, clickbait. Instead of calling his family or a lawyer, Raymond called a professor in his law school. He had heard someone say, "You're going to need the system to defend you one day. McErtain, you've studied it more thoroughly than anyone else." He had all the procedural errors, evidentiary rule, all municipal ordinances. He remained calm and asked to the court appeared shocked, but led him to represent himself at arraignment. Raymond asked for the video in a calm, low-pitched voice and without requesting special treatment. Surveillance footage from stores, cop cars, body cams, or anything else that could rebuild the crucial 3 minutes outside Circle 12. But the DA's officer pleaded with an official letter. Owing to a technical issue, footage from the officer's body cams were not adequately recorded, and there was no dash cam from that cruiser, no footage from the inside stores, and the camera was being maintained. Arrest record and a presumed positive field test result that's presumptive, not validated, not attested by a laboratory. Raymond was suspended from law school but freed on bond. Waiting for a review. His inbox was quiet all of a sudden. Friends he had studied with didn't reply. Veterans he had assisted in avoiding addiction, eviction, or worse now treated him as though he were one. Said to him, "I want to believe you, man, but I don't want to get dragged into anything." Another said, "I already feel guilty," merely unfollowed him without ever providing an explanation. Raymond was more interested in patterns than in the store owner. "I don't mess with the tech stuff," he said too hastily. "Handles that." Raymond nodded, thanked him, and left away. However, as he rounded the building's corner, he looked back through the window and saw Tommy already on the He. Realized someone didn't want to talk on the phone, face tight and mumbling, when footage was discovered. And if someone was afraid enough to call, it meant that the truth was or had been recorded. Instead of pursuing the video that day, he began looking into recent arrests made by Claiborne Police Department, particularly those involving black men under the age of 35 in any case, involving drug possession close to abusiness. He discovered 7, 5 of which had the same arresting officer. Sergeant Kell, the same Becker who was holding up the plastic baggie next to his vehicle, was mentioned in several incident reports. frequently with terms like routine patrol, anonymous tip, or suspicious activity close to the storefront, but this was the most concerning of the 5 occurrences, entailed missing or broken body cams. There was just affidavit, not actual video. Only when you know what to look for can you spot the pattern. And Raymond had spent years studying just that. Police accountability, criminal justice reform, and the chain of evidence of custody. Those were no longer merely academic ideas he had studied. They were now real, personal, and failing. He produced a case matrix, a confidential document that included names, dates, and arrest cross-reference trial results, charges, locations, and abnormalities in the video. It was no longer only about establishing his own innocence. Something was wrong, and if he didn't expose it, nobody else would. His next tactic was tactful. He called someone he had in Marlon Pace, a former Army friend who is currently employed as a data analyst for a federal agency. Not the FBI, hasn't been spoken to in years, not the DEA, something else entirely. They had just finished talking. Raymond called in the favor while we were drinking in Washington, D.C., and debating surveillance legislation. When Marlon didn't inquire as to why, he stated, "I need to know who deleted security footage from a private retail server." Simply groaned and said, "Send me what you have." 3 days later, Marlon returned the call, his voice flat. An IP address linked to a mobile hotspot was the source of the deletion. Becker needed this confirmation, which was activated by his patrol car on the day of your arrest. A policeman had accessing and erasing third-party footage on purpose wasn't carelessness. Raymond had enough for a request to dismiss, but it wasn't enough for him. It was evidence tampering. He lodged an official complaint with the Claiborne Internal Affairs Division because he sought publicity. Attaching the IP log, the case matrix, and a written statement Office's own series of events. He anticipated opposition, but what he didn't anticipate watchfulness for 2 weeks, with no emails or calls, and then theskery portion. He discovered his car door one evening after leaving the law library. A little jar, but nothing was taken just. His glove box, it was open, and they are not the only one who can keep track of stuff. One sticky note was stuck to his dashboard. No signature. It didn't frighten him. It proved he was, but there were no fingerprints, only purpose. Claiborne had another plan, though, and the following day Tommy, the gas station clerk, was taken into custody on suspicion of possessing cannabis with the intent to distribute it. 3 grams is hardly enough to file charges, much less detain without posting bail. However, Tommy was not allowed to go because he might interfere with an ongoing inquiry. Raymond did not return to internal affairs. Since he was aware of the play witness suppression, he took things a step further. Submitting a plea to the Georgia, he cross-checked all open complaints against Sergeant Becker in the last 18 months with the Bureau of Investigation. 4 of the cases in which Becker had testified had resulted in plea agreements. There was no trial, no video evidence, just quick convictions. No one had the means to fight back until now. Raymond discreetly contacted an Atlanta-based civil rights lawyer, showed her a woman named Talia Monroe, who had previously fought a case involving unlawful arrest all the way to the 11th Circuit, the IP logs, the matrix, the anonymous tips behavioral trend, and the inexplicable pauses in the video. Talia read quietly for 10 minutes. "You're not just building a defense, you're building a federal case." She looked up and snatched the file back. Raymond didn't tell anyone, but he continued to attend court appearances, kept during his meeting. With school officials over his suspension, he maintained a neutral expression as someone muttered. He let the quiet to grow about him, then said, "That's the guy from the drug bust." Because it was about to break, and when it did, silence made noise. It began with a letter late one evening. A printed envelope slipped beneath Raymond's door. His name was typed in block letters, with no stamp or return address. 1 page. Just a line of text, no salutation, no threats. "You weren't the investigate Darnell case number 41, send 13, that was it." Raymond took a seat and began to dig with a legal pad. Amen. 13, number 41. 6 months earlier, 2 blocks away from Raymond, defendant Darnell Williams, age 23, was taken into custody. Had been taken. Sergeant Kyle, the same arresting officer charged him with possession with intent. Becker, the same justification, the same anonymous tip, the same inability to provide complete body cam footage. Darnell had no attorney, no chance, and accepted a plea bargain because of a computer glitch. Years. But this is what anyone anticipated. Raymond made the first discovery. Hidden inside the digital court record was a request from the case. A time-stamped image of the confiscated contraband taken at the moment of the arrest. Raymond was more interested in the background than the proof. Becker's patrol car door was open, and a police-edged mobile Wi-Fi hotspot gadget, similar to the one Marlin had, was plainly visible laying on the seat, tracked back to the gas station server breach. All of a sudden, Raymond wasn't the only one. He could demonstrate that it was a trend. The following morning, he made the 2-hour drive to Talia. Monroe assisted Darnell in submitting a request for a legal visit to the prison where he was doing time, saying conscioning legal battle. Darnell entered the interview room with swollen eyes and rough hands. Raymond wasted no time. Remember everything that happened that night? I told them I had nothing, Darnell remarked after giving a sluggish nod. Before I even got out, they searched my car. However, my lawyer told me that it wouldn't help when I said that in court. Raymond demonstrateth IP trace, the picture, and the case matrix. Darnell looked at it for a long time. After a lengthy pause, Raymond muttered, I knew it wasn't right. I just didn't think anyone would ever care. That room with a fresh fire in his chest and a signed affidavit. He wasn't no longer protecting himself. This department had attempted to close the wound with time and silence, but he was reopening it. 2 days later, the next domino fell. WCTV-7, the local news channel, published a late-night article about the latest information surrounding veteran Raymond Ellis' arrest. Someone had disclosed a section of the discovery file, which includes Becker's conflicting assertions and the missing surveillance timestamps. It was insufficient to prompt action, but sufficient to start a conversation. However, Raymond anticipated a response from the department, and they did. After 2 evenings, while Raymond saw a dark SUV parked across the street as he was leaving the community center, where he continued to volunteer, it wasn't from the fleet of the department. He had committed those plates to memory. This one had a rich hue, was quiet, observing. The SUV trailed behind him as he got into his vehicle and drove away, not hovering and tailing. An unspoken communication. Raymond, however, did not recoil. He returned home, shut out the lights, and composed a letter, this time to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Separation. He mentioned the IP breach, the pattern of missing film and the suppressed Tommy, the witness, the threats, and now the wrong Darnell Williams incarceration with tangible evidence, in broad daylight. It was a violation of civil rights. He mailed after it was certified. He backed up all of his files to 3 other encrypted drives. One each for Talia, Thepris, and another he concealed behind a defaced Federal Rules of Evidence law book. The subsequent pressure the point originated. Within the House, under the influence of student and faculty advocacy, Raymond's law school groups called for an urgent hearing to discuss his suspension. Raymond stood alone at the stage, surrounded by framed certificates and fluorescent lights. Composed and at ease. Methodical, he didn't beg. He made a presentation. He took them through each line of custody and occurrence, infraction, every fabricated detail. He then presented Darnell's affidavit to them, and lastly, before it was erased, the original timestamp from the gas station camera. Mr. Ellis, are you implying that this was all intentional? A professor leaned closer and Raymond responded, surgery. I'm presenting evidence that a trend exists. Not making any recommendations of racially motivated targeting, evidence tampering. And systemic misbehavior has gone unpunished in Claiborne, PD, and I was one of many. After a long period of silence, his punishment was removed after a unanimous vote, but the actual storm hadn't even begun because that evening, when Raymond left the building with his phone ringing with encouraging messages, his fresh notification appeared in my inbox. A burner email with no name, just an attachment. Video.mpp 4. Everything changed when he hit play. Initially blurry. The footage was taken from what appeared to be a dash-mounted security equipment and was precisely time-stamped. It showed Becker's patrol cruiser approaching the petrol station an hour before to Raymond's arrest. There were no lights or sirens. He rolled in quietly, got out, glanced around, and opened the back door. The first shock was taking a spare key out of Raymond's parked automobile. 30 seconds later, Becker took a tiny transparent piece off his jacket. He placed the same size and type of evidence bag beneath the back seat and gave the cushion a manly pat. The file terminated there. Setting bait and leaving without turning around, watermark. No cuts in the editing, simply unmistakable video proof of a setup. Someone had been watching that night. And Raymond watched it again, then a third time, another silent watcher in addition to the gas station cameras, and now they'd passed the torch. Raymond was unsure if it was a whistleblower or an ally, but the message was unmistakable. He forwarded the video to Talia right away, saying, "Never crazy. They only wanted you to question your own memories. Raymond, if we move now, we don't simply get your charges reduced. We light a match the 10 minutes after she called. State cannot suppress." She reached out to media outlets, civil rights groups, forwarded the video straight to the DOJ with the topic, and filed an emergency motion with the county court. Line, corruption pattern. Federal review urgently needed. That same the veteran was framed, according to body cam footage that was leaked, as reported by WCTV7 that night. Raymond Ellis trended overnight when the video of the police planting narcotics went viral on Twitter. And then national news. In addition to hashtags such as #end qualified immunity, #justice for veterans, and #police accountable now. In a public statement released that morning, the mayor's office described the video as upsetting. And intolerable. Sergeant Becker was placed on administrative leave by Claiborne Police Department within hours. However, it was too late to stop it. National organizations promised to help, and civil rights attorneys poured into the area. Within 72 hours, a federal oversight task force showed there to start a formal probe into the departments, and Raymond continued to go. Driving straight to the prison once more, this time as a man with power rather than as a legitimate visitor, and he met with Darnell, said, "Your story is coming out," and gave him a flash disk. Reached out to the relatives of the other individuals on the matrix. All of the young men who had agreed to a plea bargain were burdened with Becker's findings. A few sobbed, a few swore, and one merely muttered, "I knew he wasn't insane." Every one of their tales fueled the flames. Raymond gathered them into a formal civil rights lawsuit. The litigation was a class action that accused Becker, as well as the department letter, for racial stereotyping, deliberate negligence, and the obliteration of evidence that could clear the accused airtight. One piece remained, but the intention was crystal. Becker had stopped talking, made no public remarks, and there were rumors that Raymond was unconcerned by the fact that he had left town, been placed in protective custody, and had obtained legal counsel he was concerned about. Becker's knowledge, because misconduct such as this never worked in a vacuum. Someone higher had to have given their approval. The unexpected source of the break was a young officer who had just graduated from the academy. Sent Raymond an anonymous email stating that she had received instructions not to wear her body camera during specific patrols, and that evidence lockers were frequently opened without a supplementary sign-off. She was able to hear Becker in the affidavit number 8 was the locker room statement, "The law student's going to wish he stuck to books." Then in the 9th affidavit, a former dispatcher acknowledged making 911 calls. Were occasionally diverted to circumvent official logging. Particularly tips used to support the dam had burst due to pressure from the DOJ and national authorities. Media. 2 lieutenants were suspended. Becker was arrested and charged, and the Claiborne police chief resigned. His bond was refused for conspiracy to violate civil rights under federal statute in addition to evidence tampering. That day, Raymond stood outside the courthouse to remind everyone in the vicinity of what this was. Not to boast or perform. Has always been about truth, not retaliation. Reporters rushed in, and one said, "Mr. Do you feel vindicated, Ellis?" He responded firmly, saying, No one prevails when the system must be humiliated into performing its duties. However, it will be worthwhile if this prevents even one more child from being set up. Then, as silently as before, he left, but this time the entire planet ensued. Although Becker was silenced in the courtroom, Raymond was wise enough to not confuse one falling badge for complete accountability. These well-thought-out mechanisms don't fall apart after one arrest. They change. They conceal, they defend their roots, and he had a hunch that this was what was occurring right now. Because just as momentum appeared to be at its zenith with the DOJ opening a civil rights probe, the case receiving daily national media coverage, despite legal professionals praising Raymond's case as a possible turning point in the reform of police enforcement, a silent, frightening the institutions surrounding him froze, and the mayor canceled public appearances. Interviews with the interim police chief were declined, and Raymond's federal investigations, particularly regarding internal protocols for training and oversight, were abruptly confronted with ambiguous denials or automated delays. Then came an anonymous email with the subject, "This goes." One line, one file, deeper than Becker. "I've included a scanned copy of a 2-year-old police department performance review page. Clarence Dugan, the former police chief, has previously summarized an experimental enforcement technique intended to aimed at decreasing recidivism by deterring recurrent encounters with law enforcement in areas with high crime rates." The document mentioned authorized strategies, including strategic evidence flagging for proactive deterrence. It was not policy. Raymond stared at the word as if it were a tooth. Concealment to plant evidence. A covert, unwritten set of ghost releases a tactic, and Becker wasn't the one who came up with it. He was just doing it. Something more formal, older, and now that Raymond had this paper, a straight line to the top. Shortly before Raymond's retirement, Clarence Dugan relocating to a gated community outside of Atlanta, but his identity remained held weight among Georgia law enforcement. Some described him as a results-driven innovator and reformer. Type of individual who spoke at state conferences about rebuilding public confidence and approving documents that undermined it. Raymond wanted a more astute opponent because he knew that going to court to face Dugan would lead to cover-ups. Perspective. "Can you pull?" he asked his pal Marlin in Federal Data Systems. Marlin paused. "Anything strange on Dugan's retirement records?" "Ray, that man has true friends, the kind that burn logs rather than files." But when Marlin called back an hour later, he discovered something, an encrypted laptop and a digital purchase trail. Military Raymond's eyes furrowed. That's not typical for retirees. Grade, bought 2 weeks before he stepped down. The delivery. Address was to a downtown private legal business, not his stated residence. In the civil case, a firm that just so happened to have filed a move to suppress Raymond's whole body of evidence complaint, claiming that the chain of custody had been corrupted by improper digital snooping. Duggan wasn't hiding, he was getting ready to respond with corporate might, legality, and silence. Raymond understood that he was now facing not just a department but the blueprint that underpinned it. Systemic racism superstructure is cloaked in policy. The retired chief's officers are being protected by the legal advisors and insurance attorneys using defense funds funded by taxpayers. He turned to Talia, saying, "We go federal all the time. Of architecture that endures beyond elections." And news headlines. Talia agreed. Well, bring the strategy itself to trial, not just the state court, no local bias. And that altered everything, Guy. They transformed the lawsuit, making it more than just unjust arrest. According to the color of law idea, it is now claimed that repeated civil rights abuses are connected to misbehavior at the official policy level. That upgrading meant one thing: the case could no fall within Section 1983's civil fines and federal authority. The temperature shifted as soon as the lawsuit was refiled, and Dugan's legal team attempted to reach a settlement, discreetly. Gave Raymond a six-figure lump money with a rigorous non-disclosure clause. There would be no trial, nozzlance, no precedent, no testimony. Raymond turned down the offer and disclosed it to the media. The tale went viral once more. A retired police chief proposes a payment to avoid testifying in the civil rights case for veterans. That headline hurt Dugan's reputation more than anything else verdict ever could. Civil rights organizations redoubled their efforts within hours. A federal monitoring group lodged its own ethics complaint, and an inside firm whistleblower, fed up with witnessing, sent Raymond an internal memo with files tagged as containment priority, minimize Ellis, target procedural errors, and prevent policy precedents. This means undermining and discrediting him, portray him as careless, conceited, and a veteran who received. Fortunately, he wasn't a man who outwitted an empire, but once more, they underestimated something, knowing that he had studied their playbook more thoroughly than they had studied him. Raymond wasn't merely protecting himself, what they were attempting to accomplish. Don't beat him, don't even mute him, just drain him of his money, his emotions, lawfully until his truth's edges merged into yet another case. It's the oldest tactic in systemic power is to delay justice rather than use force, but this time, the clock wasn't ticking. He was the first to strike. Now, in cooperation with the Congressional Oversight Committee, Talia filed a move to compel discovery while shadowing the case, but not merely the local police department or Becker. She sought Dugan's laptop, the encrypted one. Talia retaliated, claiming attorney-client privilege, but mentioned a limited window. If the information included proof of an active criminal conspiracy, the judge permitted a sealed review, and privilege was nullified. Discovered the case broken open, revealing folders marked Predictive Zone, Enforcement Strategy Alpha. Within, those training slides, internal memos, coding for young black guys with minor past offenses, data models that indicate high-friction suspects, and phenomeners with criminal histories or any link to internet anti-police rhetoric. To make matters worse, the documents showed that Claiborne was only one node in a larger approach that had been sold to more than a dozen minor agencies throughout the state. This was a for-profit policing algorithm, not a rogue police officer. New language and spread like a virus. Duggan had granted it a license following Ingrid and making a living by instructing cities on how to legally target without being labeled as such. Instead of speaking to the media, Raymond let the court transcript do the talking. At a federal hearing held when Duggan was asked to testify in Atlanta, he showed there wearing a fitted gray suit, remained composed, but his stance collapsed as the judge revealed the sealed material, and he declined to respond. Some questions were skirted, privilege was cited, and then the flip moment arrived. Talia presented the judge with a newly notarized, signed affidavit in the courtroom. Originated from a former junior analyst who had assisted in creating the enforcement matrix and was a whistleblower within Duggan's company. Regardless of behavior, she was told to exclude any names marked as white or wealthy during her testimony. Metrics. After 6 months, she resigned. That document came as a shock. The judge responded quickly, directing a formal referral to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice for criminal review. With increased jurisdiction, the class action lawsuit would proceed. Suddenly, a potential civil liability bomb was ticking under any community that adopted Dugan's tactics. Raymond had done what most believed was impossible. He had not only cleared his name, but also revealed that his imprisonment was the result of an unseen machine that signed contracts, wore suits, and identified itself as reform while surreptitiously profiting from racial prejudice. He had done it without a badge, a pistol, or a yell. Just law. In a few weeks, the DOJ formally opened inquiries into 5 additional news anchors started referring to the departments connected to Strategy Alpha as a digital congressional members voiced their opinions. Civil rights organizations demanded hearings, and the redlining scandal. Raymond remained silent until he was eventually spotted by the media outside the courthouse. One reporter then posed the query that was on everyone's mind. Uveno contributed to the discovery of Georgia law enforcement's largest coordinated racial profiling strategy? What do you want next? I want systems to fear silence, he added, looking calmly into the camera. Due to the fact that when Ao walked away, allowing the weight of the truth to do its work, a man like me stays quiet. It's not surrender, it's strategy. The conversation and the walls that had attempted to enclose him eventually started to crumble. 6 months following the decision, Raymond Ellis remained in the same courtroom, as a keynote speaker rather than as a plaintiff or even a defendant. At a legal conference on constitutional rights and systemic injustice. Young attorneys, veterans, his name was now in case law, and he was surrounded by federal officials and civil rights advocates across the nation. His narrative had been discussed on legal podcasts, studied in think tanks, and referenced in classrooms. He came to say something that the majority of those in positions of authority were still not prepared to hear, but he did not come to be praised. I didn't win because I'm smarter. Instead, I started using memory and changed the microphone. I won because I didn't forget what they hoped I would internalize, not because I'm a veteran. That quiet is, he paused to allow the room to breathe. When they planted evidence, he said, safer than truth. Not only was I going to be imprisoned in my automobile, but I was also going to be marked as disposable in a system that has been conditioned to place greater faith in uniforms than in personal experience. However, what they were unaware of, people like me don't disappear quietly. We learn, adapt, and create. This is something that systems like this constantly forget. Evidence. There was silence, the kind that indicates people are paying attention. He discussed law